Greetings, gents. Welcome to episode 2 of Econoclasm. Today I will be discussing a famous or infamous Rothbard quote that is commonly thrown at anarcho-capitalists. A quote where Rothbard says, "We are not anarchists." Rothbard, of course, being the founder, ideologically, of anarcho-capitalism. A lot of left anarchists love to use this quote to say, oh, you're not real anarchist, you're not with us, you're not a true anarchist, and try to pass off their breed of anarchism as real anarchism. And so I'm going to address that quote because it's not what it's made out to be. I know it seems pretty obvious when he says we are not anarchists. How could that just not be a shut case that ANCAPs aren't anarchist? However, there's a lot more to the quote than it seems at first. Now, obviously, first and foremost, he did say it. It's not something that was made up. And I'm not going to try and argue that he didn't say it. But it's important to note that it's out of context, of course. Generally the leftist favorite tool in debating. It's not even the full sentence. And so I'm going to give the context to the quote and show how it's actually kind of just doing the opposite of what left anarchists tend to use it for. Now, the quote comes from an article that Rothbard wrote sometime in the 1950s. The article was never published, but it's still available to be read. Anyone can go look at it on the Mises Institute. All you have to do is Google Rothbard, "We are not anarchist." Find the Mises link. I believe it is the second link on Google. So it's not hard to find. You can go look at it anytime to fact check anything I'm saying. Read it for yourself. I'm not going to read the article verbatim. So if you think I'm trying to omit something or twist facts, feel free, go read the article for yourself. But anyone can go read the article, can go find the quote, can find its full context. But it's from the 1950s. And the time is a bit important because Rothbard is referring to libertarians here, not anarcho-capitalists. Because the first use of anarcho-capitalism wasn't until about 1968. And it wasn't first used by Rothbard until 1971. So he's not even talking about anarcho-capitalist here. He's talking about the general term libertarian, specifically the libertarian that is used in the United States. I know that libertarian can mean more socialist over in Europe, or elsewhere in the world. So specifically the right-wing, anti-government, small government, free market ideology of libertarians. That's what Rothbard is referring to. It's not even in reference to anarcho-capitalism. So right there, it should just be, the whole argument should be null and void. He's not talking about anarcho-capitalists. He's not saying anarcho-capitalists are not anarchists. He's referring to the general ideological term libertarians as he understood it in the 1950s. It would be about 15, 20 years before the term anarcho-capitalist would even come about. So, first off, good job, left anarchists. You're using a term, or you're using a quote to discredit a term that hadn't even existed when the quote was said. So, big applause for you there. Now, to get into the actual article, it starts with a hypothetical question for libertarians. If you're so opposed to all these different government programs, the post office, welfare, what have you, are you an anarchist? And Rothbard has libertarians responding, oh no, of course not. We're for limited government. The response comes back, why is it okay for government to do the things you support under limited government, but not okay for them to do these things that you don't support? How do you draw this line? And so Rothbard recognizes this and states that the conclusion for a libertarian is that a, quote, pure libertarian must advocate a society where an individual may voluntarily support none or any police or judicial agency that he deems to be efficient and worthy of his custom, end quote. So Rothbard goes on to ask, is this system, this ideology, anarchism? And while it may be a seemingly easy question, Rothbard says it's actually difficult to answer. Firstly, he says there is no accepted definition of anarchism. He says the term has split wildly from any cohesive singular definition, and that there are a large variety of groups and ideologies referring to themselves as anarchist in one way or another. It says that these anarchists have extreme gaps in their ideologies, such as anarchist communist versus anarchist individualist, where their ideas are as diametrically opposed as you can get, but they still call themselves anarchist. So he starts to analyze it etymologically. The word anarchism comes from anarche, which means opposition to rulers or commands. Now he says that the term anarchist coming from this word is broad enough to cover any ideology that is opposed to a coercive monopoly on force or authority. But the muddling of the term comes in with left anarchism, which was the predominant form of anarchism at the time, ideologically speaking. And they added to the term anarchist. It wasn't just an opposition to rulers or commands. They added in private property and capitalism as equally evil to the state, to this coercive authority, these rulers who hold this power. And so that's where the term leaves from its traditional, purely etymological source to now the more politicized form of the word anarchism. Here Rothbard kind of goes at a left anarchist with a problematic question. How can capitalism and the state be abolished at the same time? You would need the state to abolish capitalism. And we get a few ideas from various quote-unquote anarchist thinkers on this. For example, the Marxists have the idea that you would empower the state so greatly that it can destroy capitalism, and then without capitalism, the state will simply wither away afterwards. However, that's supposed to happen. Go for it. As far as I know, every time it's been tried, it didn't work. The Soviet Union, North Korea, mainland China, Cuba, Vietnam, Laos, anywhere else where there were communist governments, never saw the disappearance of the state after capitalism went away. Now communists will say, oh, that was state capitalism. Okay, that's not what we're here for. Anyway, another response to abolishing capitalism in the state at the same time is the idea of syndicalism. Rothbard looks at basically groups of workers who own the means of production and plan for themselves. He says this leads to either a central planner that has to coordinate the various communes, or that it will lead to chaos, legitimate chaos, not in the legitimate negative chaos. Not just chaos as in lack of control, or chaos as in the general way people think about anarchy nowadays when they say, oh, it's chaos. Or that a state would simply reform with syndicalism. Basically that this idea that the state and capitalism will disappear at the same time doesn't make sense, and that these left anarchists have a bigger issue with capitalism than the state itself. Which is kind of the crux of the point that these left anarchists aren't really anarchists themselves, because their main concern isn't the coercive power of the state, it's capitalism. As can be seen during the Spanish Civil War, Rothbard notes that left anarchists wielded their collective coercive authority by banning the use of money and punishing it with the death penalty for anyone who's caught using money. He notes that their anti-state and anti-property ideologies clashed with one another, and that their hatred of coercion was superseded by their hate of money and property. So, this idea that capitalism and the state go away at the same time, clearly history shows that these left anarchists use the state to go after capitalism, because their biggest issue isn't the state, it isn't coercion, it's capitalism. Continuing on in the article, Rothbard looks at British anarchists at this time and states that they have outright rejected logic with their ignorance of economics and their claim that crime would vanish under their view of anarchism. So this expands on the idea that the people who identify as anarchists at the time Rothbard is writing this article are simply just ignorant of the science of economics and just outright reject basic logic when it comes to how the world works, which, as we'll see, builds into the quote that we're discussing here. So Rothbard at this point brings back up the question, are libertarians anarchists? And he says this must be answered in the negative, because considering who anarchists are today, again, this is back in the 1950s, libertarians are the opposite of anarchist. They don't hold these collectivist ideologies, they don't reject logic and economics. That what is the generally accepted term of anarchist, libertarians are the opposite of. Now, Rothbard looks at individualist anarchists in the United States to show how there might be confusion on the idea of libertarians being anarchists, because these individualists don't have these communist, socialist, syndicalist ideologies that these other anarchists have, so why not identify with these individualist anarchists so you can still apply the term anarchist? Rothbard goes into their ideology in depth a bit. If you really want to look at it, you can read the article. I'm not trying to leave anything out here. But he still had his issues with them to show why libertarians aren't these individualist anarchists, both some ideological and economic issues. basically his complaints were these individualist anarchists only believed in property control of what a man was actively using, and that they relied too heavily on juries within their systems rather than a form of private libertarian law. And then economically, they viewed interest in profit as exploitation, much like the left anarchist. So there's just a brief overview of what his problems with the individualist anarchist in the United States were. He also goes on briefly to touch on Leo Tolstoy's pacifist anarchism, and basically says it can only work in a community of saints where you'll never need violence because no one's going to ever do anything that would require violence to act against. So Rothbard again comes back to the question, are libertarians anarchists? He says it cannot be answered on etymological grounds. Some say libertarian is anarchist, some say it is archist. However, I would disagree with Rothbard on this. I would say the type of libertarianism he is describing, that he described at the start of the article, would be anarchist on etymological grounds. With the definition he gave of opposition to rulers or commands, that's perfectly in line with the type of libertarianism he describes. Just because the term is used by people with different views doesn't mean that it is etymologically in line with what they believe. Now, at this point, we get to the quote that this episode is about, that the left anarchists throw. And so I'm going to read the little section in the article here where he says it. I'm going to read the sentence before, the sentence with it, and the sentence after to give full context within the article after going through all the context that has been said within the article. I'm going to be reading the direct quote. Again, if you want to go pull up the article yourself to make sure I'm not lying about this, you can follow along. If I can remember, wherever I can add, I'll add a link to the article. I know that I'm going to put this out on YouTube, so hopefully in the description there'll be a link to the article that you can find to read it yourself. Quote, "Furthermore, we find that all of the current anarchists are irrational collectivists, and therefore at opposite poles from our position. We must therefore conclude that we are not anarchists, and that those who call us anarchists are not on firm etymological ground and are being completely unhistorical. On the other hand, it is clear that we are not archists either. We do not believe in establishing a tyrannical central authority that will coerce the non-invasive as well as the invasive." End quote. So there you have it. The full context for the Rothbard "we are not anarchist" quote. Rothbard then ends the article by suggesting that libertarians refer to themselves as non-archist, basically a way to describe what their belief is without falling into the trap of being lumped in with what anarchists are and what they were describing themselves as. But the quote that's taken out of context and used is an attempt to make ANCAPs sputter and kind of throw back in their face, "Oh, you're not real anarchist. Even Rothbard said you're not." But like I said at the start, the term anarcho-capitalist didn't exist yet. And as you have from the article, the whole point of saying we are not anarchist is because the term is attached to illogical collectivists who hate property more than the state. Those anarchists don't hold to anarchy as their ideal. They are perfectly fine with the state if it's going after capitalism, property, money. So they may say they're anarchist, but they're okay with the state. They're fine with the state. They use the state as a tool. No legitimate anarchist can use the state as a tool to achieve some other end. That's not what the whole concept of anarchy is. That's the point Rothbard is making. We're not anarchist because anarchists aren't anarchists. They have perverted the term so much that what it means isn't what it should mean. So these left anarchists want to say, oh, well, we're the real anarchist. Fine. You still hold a completely unintelligent ideology opposite to what you claim to believe. Left anarchism is inherently hypocritical. Your ideology isn't logically consistent. It's cognitive dissonance as a belief system. And so you can say, we're the real anarchist, but only ANCAPs oppose immoral force, coercion, across the board. They're not going to say, oh, well, I hate the state, but there's this other thing I hate more, and so I'm going to use the state to go after it. No. There's plenty of things I don't like personally, but I'm not going to use the state to go after them because I oppose the state above all else. At least in a political realm, yes, I'm religious, but this is about politics. Yes, Satan's the greatest enemy, but when it comes to political ideas, ANCAPs are more in line with the pure ideology of anarchism. These left anarchists abandon the idea to chase these boogeymen because they don't like being poor, or they don't like that they have to go to work. They don't like that other people have more money than them. So, your out-of-context quote is irrelevant. Celebrate all you want over whatever terminology you want to use. Fine. We'll switch to the term voluntarist. Ta-da. Where's your argument now? Oh, fine. Have the term anarchism. That doesn't mean your ideology is completely nonsensical, unrealistic, and that you don't believe what you claim to believe. You hate these things that are not violent, but you claim they're violent because out of some form of envy or anger. Property is no evil, but you want it to be because you don't have any. You hate money because other people have more of it than you. You claim that work is coercion because somehow the state of nature is evil. So, go ahead. even if Rothbard minted that anarcho-capitalism isn't anarchy, it doesn't matter. Left anarchism is ridiculous as an ideology. Anyone who understands economics knows your ideology isn't logically possible. You will not find any economists supporting planned economies or Lee's control of the economy. You cannot have a completely controlled market. It's impossible. Everything will fall apart. Your society won't be able to produce things. Oh, it can produce lesbian tap therapy and trans slam poetry. Great. But you're not going to have a functional economy. And when I say a functional economy, I don't mean like, oh, well, we have a higher GDP. No, I mean, you can't produce food. You'll starve to death. You can't produce houses. Even though a lot of left anarchists seem to love to live in tents in their own filth. But I don't care over this small etymological battle, even though I've had an entire episode on it. Your ideology is stupid. I don't really like to just say other ideas are stupid, but left anarchism is. Communism just doesn't make sense to someone with a functioning brain. Whether you can win the battle of who's the true anarchist, which I have a future episode planned about just the term anarchism as a whole, to get into that, but your ideology is still completely illogical. That's based outside the reality of humanity, of the world. There's no post-scarcity. Resources and means are scarce. The world exists as it is. You can't just change how the world is because you want an ideology to work. We are not anarchists. Fine. You're not intelligent. I'd much rather be on the side that uses a functioning brain when developing an ideology and doesn't throw out the basic tenets I claim to adhere to just because I don't like something else. Even if we grant you that you're the anarchist, we're still the only ones whose ideology doesn't have killing people for actions that aren't violent, that aren't harming other people. We're the only ones who hold to opposing coercion as a whole. You'll endorse coercion, we oppose it. It's that simple. Have the term anarchist. We have morality. That's far more important. We have the moral system, you don't. We have the logical system, you don't. So, go ahead and throw around this out of context Rothbard quote. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change that your ideology is immoral and illogical.